In this video, I plan on reading some favorite poems of mine. I have been reading a lot of poetry this year, especially in the last few months, and I've discovered a lot of poems that get me really excited about poetry. And one of the things I love to do is to read poetry out loud. I just figured it might be fun to just do a video reading some of my favorite poems out loud. And yeah, that's it. I've selected 8 poems to read today that are some of my favorite. And before I do that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time at the beginning of this video talking about a particular anthology of poetry. And this particular anthology, this particular volume of poetry, I would credit as the volume of poetry that got me into poetry. And that would be the New Oxford Book of English Verse. This is edited by Helen Gardner. There are 2 Oxford Book of English Verse. The other one is edited by Sir Arthur Quiller Couch. This is like the original New Oxford Book of English Verse. I think this was published, so there was the original Oxford Book of English Verse, which I think was published at the end of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, early 20th century, by Arthur Quiller Couch, and then he did an update version to include more poems into his day, which I think was like 1918, 1920, something like that. I don't know exactly off the top of my head. And so there's this New Oxford Book of English Verse, and then I think some decades later, I don't know precisely when off the top of my head, Oxford came out with this, the New Oxford Book of English Verse, edited by Helen Gardner. And this is the volume of poetry that I love with my whole heart. I have spent so much time reading out of this. It has brought me so much joy, and I cannot recommend it enough. And I've chosen several poems to read from it today. So we'll get into the poems. So the first poet who we'll be reading today is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I'll be reading out of the New Oxford Book of American Verse, and the poem is called The Fire of Driftwood. And I'm starting this video off with a Longfellow poem because I would say that outside of antiquity, outside of Homer, Virgil, the usual suspects when it comes to ancient poets, I would say Longfellow is my favorite poet. But there are many close seconds. I don't know, Lord Byron or Shelley, for example. They're very close seconds. But Longfellow, I've not read a single poem from him that I did not love. I'll be only reading one poem from him today. And when I sat down to when I was thinking about what the kind of poems I wanted to recite in this video, I knew I wanted to do at least one Longfellow poem. I wanted to do one Longfellow poem. And it was very difficult to choose which poem I was going to do because there's so many from him that I love. And but the one today felt right for this video. And so, yeah, anyway, this is The Fire of Driftwood. And also, before I start reading any poetry, I make no claims to being good at reciting poetry. I'm sure of the poems that I'm reading today, you can probably find somewhere on the internet a better recitation. So yeah, what I'm saying basically is I'll do my best when reciting the poems in this video. And also in this particular poem, what you will notice is that I will sort of stretch a rhyme, I guess. So in order to match the rhyme, instead of saying the word again, I would say again, so I can match, or complete the rhyme. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that before I start reading. Anyways, okay, so This is The Fire of Driftwood by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. We sat within the farmhouse old, whose windows, looking o'er the bay, gave to the sea breeze damp and cold an easy entrance night and day. Not far away we saw the port, the strange, old-fashioned, silent town, the lighthouse, the dismantled fort, the wooden houses quaint and brown. We sat and talked until the night descending filled the little room. Our faces faded from the sight, our voices only broke the gloom. We spake of many a vanished scene, of what we once had thought and said, of what had been and might have been, and who was changed and who was dead. And all that fills the hearts of friends, when first they feel, with secret pain, their lives thenceforth have separate ends, and never can be one again. The first slight swerving of the heart, that words are powerless to express, and leave it still unsaid in part, or say it in too great excess. The very tones in which we spake had something strange. I could but mark the leaves of memory seemed to make a mournful rustling in the dark. Oft died the words upon our lips, as suddenly from out the fire, built of the wreck of stranded ships, the flames would leap and then expire. And as their splendor flashed and failed, we thought of wrecks upon the main, of ships dismasted that were hailed and sent no answer back again. The windows rattling in their frames, the ocean roaring up the beach, the gusty blast, the bickering flames, all mingled vaguely in our speech, until they made themselves a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long-lost ventures of the heart that send no answers back again. O flames that glowed, O hearts that yearned, they were indeed too much akin, the driftwood fire without that burned, the thoughts that burned and glowed within. So yeah, that's one of my favorites from Longfellow. Though there are many more. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So that was the first poem I wanted to read. And then now we're going to go to the New Oxford Book of English Verse. And we're going to go to, what year did this poet live? The author of this poem was born in 1543 and died in 1607. This is Sir Edward Dyer, who has two poems in the New Oxford Book of English Verse. But outside of this anthology, I have never heard of this poet before, and I know very little about him. I think I recall when I discovered this poem, I was trying to find some information about him or like a painting, and I was really coming up with nothing. But anyway, this poem I do love. This is from Sir Edward Dyer, and this is called "My Mind to Me a Kingdom Is." So here it goes. My mind to me a kingdom is, such perfect joy therein I find, that it excels all other bliss, that a world affords or grows by kind. Though much I want, which most would have, yet still my mind forbids to crave. No princely pomp, no wealthy store, no force to win the victory, no wily wit to salve a sore, no shape to feed a loving eye. To none of these I yield as thrall, for why? My mind doth serve for all. I see how plenty suffers oft, and hasty climbers soon do fall. I see that those which are aloft, mishap doth threaten most of all. They get with toil, they keep with fear, such cares my mind could never bear. Content I live, this is my stay, I seek no more than may suffice. I press to bear no haughty sway, look, what I lack my mind supplies. Lo, thus I triumph like a king, content with that my mind doth bring. Some have too much, yet still do crave. I little have, and seek no more. They are but poor, though much they have, and I am rich with little store. They poor, I rich, they beg, I give. They lack, I leave, they pine, I live. I laugh not at another's loss. I grudge not at another's gain. No worldly waves my mind can toss. My state at one doth still remain. I fear no foe, I fawn no friend, I loathe not life, nor dread no end. Some weigh their pleasure by their lust, their wisdom by their rage of will. Their treasure is their only trust, a cloaked craft their store of skill. But all the pleasure that I find is to maintain a quiet mind. My wealth is health and perfect ease, my conscience clear, my chief defense. I neither seek by bribes to please, nor by desert to breed offense. Thus do I live, thus will I die. Would all did so, as well as I. So yeah, that poem, I remember being the absolute delight of finding that poem in this anthology. I think it was just the title that caught my eye when I was flipping through the pages, and I particularly love what is this, stanza 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 and 6. I love 5 and 6. Let me read them again. Some have too much, yet still do crave. I little have, and seek no more. They are but poor, though much they have, and I am rich with little store. They poor, I rich, they beg, I give. They lack, I leave, they pine, I live. I laugh not at another's loss. I grudge not at another's gain. No worldly waves my mind can toss. My state at one doth still remain. I fear no foe, I fawn no friend. I loathe not life, nor dread no end. I love that. I love the change in the rhythm, I guess, in that poem. And again, I should also, I should say again that you will find no expert analysis in this video. I'm just reading poems I like and maybe blabbering a few words about them. So anyway, on to the next poem. So the next poem I'll be reading is titled Exiled, and it's by Edna St. Vincent-Millay. And I will be reading it from one of my favorite anthologies of poetry and one of the most treasured volumes on my bookshelf. This is The Eternal Sea, an anthology of sea poetry. And it was published in 1946. And if you have any love of the ocean, or reading about the ocean, or water in general, can't recommend it enough. I cannot recommend it enough. This has brought me so much joy. It has so much great poetry in here. I spent a lot of time with this book. But it's not in print anymore, I should also say. You'll have, I had to get mine, I think off eBay. That's how I found it. Anyway, the title of this poem is Exiled. It's by Edna St. Vincent-Millay. And I will now read it. Searching my heart for its true sorrow, this is the thing I find to be, that I am weary of words and people, sick of the city, wanting the sea, wanting the sticky, salty sweetness of the strong wind and shattered spray, wanting the loud sound and the soft sound of the big surf that breaks all day. Always before about my dooryard, marking the reach of the winter sea, rooted in sand and dragging driftwood, straggled the purple wild sweet pea. Always I climbed the wave at morning, shook the sand from my shoes at night, that now am caught beneath great buildings, stricken with noise, confused with light. If I could hear the green piles groaning under the windy wooden piers, see once again the bobbing barrels and the black sticks that fence the weirs. If I could see the weedy mussels crusting the wrecked and rotting hulls, hear once again the hungry crying overhead of the wheeling gulls. Feel once again the shanty straining under the turning of the tide. Fear once again the rising freshet, dread the bell in the fog outside. I should be happy, that was happy all day long on the coast of Maine. I have a need to hold and handle shells and anchors and ships again. I should be happy, that am happy never at all since I came here. I am too long away from water. I have a need of water near. And that's the poem. And I remember when I first read this poem distinctly, well, because I fell in love with it immediately, and also the first thing I thought of when I finished it was I thought of Moby Dick in the opening chapter, the first chapter of Moby Dick. Ishmael says, "Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth and hazy in the eyes, whenever it's a damp, drizzly November in my soul, I counted time to get to sea." I thought of those lines when I first read this poem, and as Moby Dick is my favorite novel of all time, it's no wonder that I absolutely love this poem. It has that it captures that feeling so well of the need to be near water, which I certainly feel always. So yeah, that was Exiled by Edna St. Vincent-Millay. So for this next poem, we'll be going back to the New Oxford Book of English Verse, and we'll be reading a poem by Alexander Pope. And the title of this poem is Sylvan Delights. Okay. See what delights in sylvan scenes appear. Descending gods have found Elysium here. In woods bright Venus with Adonis strayed, and chaste Diana haunts the forest shade. Come, lovely nymph, and bless the silent hours, when swains from shearing seek their nightly bowers, when weary reapers quit the sultry field, and crowned with corn their thanks to Ceres yield. This harmless grove no lurking viper hides, but in my breast the serpent love abides. Here bees from blossoms sip the rosy dew, but your Alexis knows no sweets but you. O deign to visit our forsaken seats, the mossy fountains and the green retreats. Wherever you walk, cool gales shall fan the glade, trees where you sit shall crowd into a shade. Wherever you tread, the blushing flowers shall rise, and all things flourish where you turn your eyes. Alexander Pope is another one of those poets that I love. I've not read anything from him that I didn't love, but I've not. I should also confess that I've not read a lot of Pope. I've read only like a fraction of his work, but I've enjoyed it very much. So that's why I felt compelled to include him in this video. And also on my pronunciation in that poem, I know there's elision in this poem for the word wherever. It should be like where'er, but the poem just doesn't sound right when I try to pronounce it with the elision. I don't like the way I recite it, so I just sort of just said wherever. But I understand that I'm omitting the elision when reciting it, so I just want to mention that. But yeah, and also a note on Alexander Pope. I've actually mentioned him on this channel before because in 2022, one of my reading goals at the beginning of the year was to read his translation of the Iliad, and which I actually never ended up doing. I have not yet read his translation of the Iliad. Actually, the next translation of the Iliad I plan on reading is George Chapman, right there. I have both the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Homeric hymns, published by Stanford University Press. Have not yet read Pope's Iliad, but I will. So that was Sylvan Delights by Alexander Pope, a lovely poem, and I loved the last four lines. I mean, how could you not? I'll read it one more time. Wherever you walk, cool gales shall fan the glade. Trees where you sit shall crowd into a shade. Wherever you tread, the blushing flowers shall rise, and all things flourish where you turn your eyes. That is delightful. Okay, on to the next poem. So this next poem is titled Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. And Old Ironsides, that title is the nickname of the ship, the USS Constitution, very famous ship. And Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote this poem, I believe, in 1830, when it was announced that the USS Constitution would be taken out of service. I am not well versed enough in the history of the USS Constitution to speak on it here on this video, but I know that ship has a very rich history, and it fought in many battles. That's all I know. And Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote this very epic poem about it, and I love it. And I discovered this poem in an anthology titled Poems of the Sea, which is published by Penguin Random House, which I do not currently have that volume, so I copied the poem down from the internet, and I'll just be reading it off my notebook. So here goes. Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. I tear her shattered ensign down. Long has it waved on high, and many an eye has danced to see that banner in the sky. Beneath it rung the battle shout, and burst the cannon's roar. The meteor of the ocean air shall sweep the clouds no more. Her deck, once red with heroes' blood, where knelt the vanquished foe, when winds were hurrying o'er the flood, and waves were white below. No more shall feel the victor's tread, or know the conquered knee. The harpies of the shore shall pluck the eagle of the sea. O better that her shattered hulk should sink beneath the wave. Her thunder shook the mighty deep, and there should be her grave. Nail to the mast her holy flag, set every threadbare sail, and give her to the god of storms, the lightning and the gale. That is epic. That is quite epic. I love it. I love that poem. And like all the poems in this video, these are poems that I fell in love with on first reading. And this one, I just remember how giddy I was when I discovered this poem. I love it dearly. And I certainly feel compelled to learn more about the USS Constitution, that's for sure. So yeah, that was Old Ironsides by Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. So for this next poem, we'll be going back to the New Oxford Book of American Verse. And this poem is by Stephen Crane, who's most famously known as the author of The Red Badge of Courage. But this is his poem, I Saw a Man Pursuing the Horizon. And it goes like this. I saw a man pursuing the horizon. Round and round they sped. I was disturbed at this. I accosted the man. It is futile, I said. You can never... You lie, he cried, and ran on. I love that poem. I love its simplicity and the humor in it, but also it feels, to me, it feels very heartfelt. If that's the right... That's not quite the right word I'm thinking of, but it's the closest approximation. It's the kind of poem that makes you want to immediately jump out of your chair and, do something immediately. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's a poem I think about often. So yeah, that was I Saw a Man Pursuing the Horizon by Stephen Crane. So for these last two poems, I'll be reading again from the New Oxford Book of English Verse. I've been jumping between different books in my notebook because I wanted to read the poems in an order that had a certain variety to them, a variety of subject matter, I mean. Anyway, the title of this poem is Heraclitus by William Johnson Cory. They told me, Heraclitus, they told me you were dead. They brought me bitter news to hear and bitter tears to shed. I wept as I remembered how often you and I had tired the sun with talking and sent him down the sky. And now that thou art lying, my dear old carrion guest, a handful of grey ashes, long, long ago at rest. Still are thy pleasant voices, thy nightingales, awake. For death, he taketh all away, but them he cannot take. And that poem first caught my eye, naturally, because of the title. I thought perhaps it may be a poem about the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus, who is a philosopher that I love. I love the fragments of Heraclitus very much. And but it's not. It's not about the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus. This poem is an adaptation slash translation of a poem from the 3rd century BC, poet named Callimachus. So it is from antiquity, but it's about a ancient person named Heraclitus, but it's not that Heraclitus. It is a Heraclitus who is friends with Callimachus. And William Johnson Cory had adapted it, translated it, kind of. That's my understanding, at least. And it's a beautiful poem. So yeah. And so now on to the last poem. This next poem is by Walter de la Mare, and it's titled The Listeners. And it may just be my favorite poem in the English language. And it goes like this. "Is there anybody there?" said the traveler, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse in the silence champed the grasses of the forest's ferny floor. And a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveler's head, and he smote upon the door again a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said. But no one descended to the traveler. No head from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his gray eyes, where he stood perplexed and still. But only a host of phantom listeners that dwelt in the lone house then stood listening in the quiet of the moonlight to that voice from the world of men, stood thronging the faint moonbeams on the dark stair that goes down to the empty hall, hearkening in an air stirred and shaken by the lonely traveler's call. And he felt in his heart their strangeness, their stillness answering his cry, while his horse moved, cropping the dark turf neath the starred and leafy sky. For he suddenly smote on the door even louder and lifted his head. "Tell them I came, and no one answered, that I kept my word," he said. Never the least stir made the listeners, though every word he spake went echoing through the shadowiness of the still house from the one man left awake. Aye, they heard his foot upon the stirrup, and the sound of iron on stone, and how the silence surged softly backwards when the plunging hooves were gone. That is The Listeners by Walter de la Mare. I will never forget reading that for the first time. I was just totally astonished, and I was so excited by the poem, I practically fell out of my chair. I think about this poem all the time. I think about the traveler. I think about, the listeners, who they were, who the traveler is. It's so mysterious, and it just lingers in my mind. And it felt right to end the video on this poem, my favorite poem. So yeah, that was The Listeners. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my recitations of these poems, even though I do not believe that they were particularly good. It was the best I can do. And if you like this video, let me know if you'd want to see more poetry videos like this one. I love reading poetry out loud. I'd be perfectly happy to do many more videos like this. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.